My name is Mamie Allen, and I'm an instructor here at UMA. Today we will be discussing the digestive system and how medical terms can create new words to identify structures within that system. So hold tight. You ready? The digestive system primarily consists of our gastrointestinal tract, which is also known as our GI tract. If we were to break that word down, we have gastro meaning stomach, intestine meaning intestine, and then AL or all, which just means pertaining to. Now these organs work in conjunction with our accessory organs. In our upper GI tract, you'll notice that it will consist of our mouth, the pharynx, or you can say the throat, the esophagus, the stomach, and all of these will transport food from the entry into the body until the digestion begins, which actually starts in the stomach. Now, when we take a look at the lower GI tract, this is sometimes referred to as our bowels, and this is made up of the small and large intestines, plus the rectum and the anus. Here, you'll notice digestion is completed and the waste material is being prepared for expulsion from the body. The accessory organs of the digestive system includes our liver, gallbladder, and the pancreas. Here we can see our major organ structures as well as our accessory organs. We see the pharynx, which is the throat, the liver in the abdomen section, stomach on the opposite side, then sits below that would be our pancreas, then it moves into our large and small intestine, then to the rectum and anus. We'll take a look at some of these structures a little closer in a bit. Here we have the structures of the oral cavity, and the major structures here are also known as the mouth, and this would consist of the lips, our hard palate, as well as our soft palate, salivary glands, tongue, teeth, as well as our periodontium. First, we have the lips, or here, the upper lip, and this is also known as the labia, and this surrounds the opening to the oral cavity. The term labia is also used to describe parts of the female genitalia. Moving on to the palate. The palate forms the roof of the mouth, and it consists of three major parts. We have the hard palate, and this is the anterior portion of the palate, and it's covered with specialized mucous membranes. We next have the soft palate, and this is the flexible posterior portion of the palate, where you can actually feel the softness. During swallowing, it has the important role of closing off our nasal passage to prevent any foods or liquid from moving upward into that nasal cavity. And then we have the uvula, which is the third part, and this hangs from the free edge of the soft palate. During swallowing, it moves upward with the soft palate. It also plays a key role in snoring and in the formation of some speech sounds. The next structure here is the tongue. You'll notice it in the center of the oral cavity or of the mouth. And this is a very strong, flexible, and muscular tissue. The posterior portion of the tongue is attached. However, the anterior end of the tongue moves freely and is a bit more flexible. And it's the functioning of the tongue that actually makes it important for chewing, speaking, as well as swallowing. And another term you may hear for chewing would be mastication. The tongue even has its different parts. We have the upper surface, and this is referred to as the dorsum. And the dorsum has a tough protective covering and in some areas small bumps, which we call papillae, or the singular term papillae. These papillae will consist of our taste buds, which are the sensory receptors for our sense of taste. Moving on to the next part of the tongue, we have the sublingual surface, and here the tissues lie under the tongue and are covered with vascular tissues. Notice when we break up that term sublingual, sub meaning low, so sublingual means under the tongue. Then we have the lingual frenum, and this is simply a band of tissue that attaches our tongue to the floor of the mouth, and this frenum limits the motion of the tongue or the movement. Here we have the teeth, and you may hear it referred to as the dental arches. and the dental arches are the bony structures of the oral cavity. These arches hold the teeth firmly in position to facilitate in chewing and speaking. Here, we see 4 types of teeth will make up the adult dentition. The maxillary arch is commonly known as the upper jaw, and this will consist of bones of the lower surface of the skull. Here, the arch does not move. The lower is called the mandibular arch, and this is commonly referred to as the lower jaw, and this is separated by a bone and is the only movable part of this joint. And not shown here, we also have the temporomandibular joint, and this is commonly referred to as TMJ. And this is formed at the back of the mouth where the maxillary and the mandibular arches come together. Whenever you hear the term dentition, this is just another way to say teeth. So our dentition refers to the natural teeth that's arranged in our upper and lower jaws. Our human dentition will consist of 4 types of teeth. We have our incisors and our canines, and these are also known as cuspids. These teeth are used for biting and tearing. Then we have our premolars, which are also known as bicuspids and molars, and these teeth are used for chewing as well as grinding. It's important to note the primary dentition is also referred to as the deciduous dentition, or an easy way to remember it is the baby teeth. These 20 teeth erupt during early childhood, and they're normally lost in late childhood, and then are replaced by our permanent teeth. The primary teeth here consist of 8 incisors, 4 canines, and 8 molars, but no premolars. Now, the permanent dentition will consist of 32 teeth designed to last our entire lifetime. Of these teeth, 20 will be replaced by primary teeth, and 12 will erupt at the back of the mouth. The permanent dentition will include 8 incisors, 4 canines, 8 premolars, and 12 molars. And if you're working in dentistry, you may hear the term occlusion used often. This would be used in dentistry as well as orthodontic treatments. This describes any contact between the chewing surfaces of our upper and lower teeth, that grid that you may hear. Now we move along in the digestive system to take a look at the structures and the tissues of the teeth. Now, the crown is the portion of the tooth that's visible in our mouth. It's covered by enamel, which is the hardest substance in the body. Notice the roots of the tooth hold it securely in place within our dental arch. These roots are protected by cementum. This is a hard substance, but it's not as strong as enamel. We next have the cervix, and this is what we refer to as the neck of the tooth, and this is where the crown and the root meet or combine. Notice the inner portion of the tooth, which is called dentin, and dentin makes up the bulk of our tooth. This is the portion that's above the gum line, and it's covered with enamel also. The root area, however, is covered with cementum. Now, as we move a little further into the roots of the tooth, we have the pulp cavity. And the pulp cavity is the area within the crown and the roots of the tooth that is surrounded by the dentin. This actually protects that delicate pulp of the tooth. Now, the pulp itself consists of a rich supply of blood vessels and nerves, and both provide nutrients that provides innervation to that tooth. Moving on to saliva and salivary glands. Saliva is the colorless liquid that maintains the moisture within our mouths. It helps also maintain the health of our teeth, and it begins the digestive process by lubricating the food that we're chewing in the process known as mastication. Here we have 3 pairs of salivary glands, and they secrete saliva, which is carried by our ducts into our mouths. The first is we have the parotid gland. Here, it's located on the face, slightly in front of each ear. And these ducts for these glands are on the inside of the cheek near our upper molars. We then have the sublingual glands, and their ducts are located on the floor of the mouth under the tongue. And then the submandibular, remember, which means lower jaw, right, from mandible. The ducts are located on the floor of the mouth near the mandible. The next structure is our pharynx, And our pharynx is commonly referred to as a passageway. It's the passageway for both our respiration as well as our digestion. Now, our pharynx plays key roles in deglutition, and this is actually what we know as swallowing. The epiglottis is a lid-like structure that closes off the entrance to the trachea to prevent food and liquids from moving from the pharynx during swallowing. Remember, the trachea is also known as our windpipe. Next, we have our esophagus. And the esophagus is the muscular tube through which our food is ingested, and it passes from the pharynx to the stomach. We have the lower esophageal sphincter, and this is also known as a cardiac sphincter. And a sphincter is simply a muscular ring between the esophagus and the stomach. During swallowing, it relaxes to allow the food to enter the stomach. This sphincter normally opens up to allow the flow of food into the stomach and then closes to prevent the stomach contents from regurgitating into the esophagus. And regurgitating simply means flowing backwards. The next structure here is the stomach. Remember that combining form was gastro. The stomach is a sac-like organ composed of the fundus, and this is the upper rounded part. Also the body, which is the main portion of the stomach, and then we also have the antrum, which is the lower portion going into the rectum area. Now take a look at the rugae. These are the folds in the lining of the stomach. These folds will allow the stomach to increase and decrease in size. Next, the gastric juices. These are made up of enzymes as well as hydrochloric acid, and these aid in the beginning of our food digestion. We then have the pyloric sphincter, and remember sphincter means a muscular ring, and this is a ring-like muscle that's located at the base of the stomach. It controls the flow of partially digested food from the stomach to the duodenum of the small intestine. And then we have the pylorus, which is the narrow passage that connects our stomach with our small intestine. Now, as we begin to enter the small intestine, take note of the structure here at the end, the duodenum. This would be the beginning of the small intestine. The small intestine. This would extend from our pyloric sphincter to the first part of our large intestine. You'll notice that it's a core organ, and it normally spans about 20 feet in length, and it consists of 3 sections. And in these sections would be where the food is digested and the nutrients are absorbed into our bloodstream. Now, starting with the first portion, remember that was the duodenum. And here, this extends from the pylorus of the stomach to the jejunum. And the jejunum is the middle portion. And here within this section, it extends from the duodenum to the ileum. And the ileum is the longest portion, and it lasts the longest from the small intestine. This extends from the jejunum to the cecum of the large intestine. Now here we have the large intestine, and notice it extends from the end of the small intestine to the anus, and it's about twice as wide as the small intestine. However, it's only about 1/4 as long. Now here, this is where waste products of digestion will be processed in preparation for the excretion that occurs within the anus. The major parts of our large intestine are the cecum, the colon, rectum, and anus. So let's take a look at the first part of the large intestine, which is the cecum. And this is a pouch that lies on the right side of our abdomen. It extends from the end of the ileum to the beginning of the colon. Now, within the cecum, we have the ileocecal sphincter, and again, a muscle-like ring that controls the flow of the blood, or controls the flow from the ileum of the small intestine into the cecum of the large intestine. Next, we have the longest part of the large intestine, and this is called the colon, and it's divided into 4 different parts. Starting with the ascending colon. This travels upward from the cecum to the undersurface of our liver. Ascending means upward. Next would be the transverse colon, and this passes horizontally across the abdominal cavity from left to right toward the spleen. Note, transverse means across. The descending colon travels down the left side of the abdominal cavity to our sigmoid colon. Note the term descending means downward. Then we have the fourth partal portion, and this is referred to as the sigmoid colon. And this is an S-shaped structure, and it continues from the descending colon above and joins the rectum below. Sigmoid means a curve like S, the letter S. And then at the exit way or at the ending line, we have the rectum and the anus. Now, the rectum is the widest division of the largest intestine. Keep in mind, it's about 4 inches of the large intestine, and it ends at the anus. The anus, which is below it, is the lower opening of our digestive tract. The flow of waste through the anus is controlled by an internal anal sphincter as well as an external anal sphincter. Those muscle rings, don't forget that. Now, because the anus and rectum are so close in proximity, you may hear the term anorectal, which just refers to the anum and the rectum as a single unit. Note, ano means anus and rect means rectum, whereas all or the AL means pertaining to. So pertaining to the anus and rectum. Now, we've covered a lot of information today, but no worries. Just be sure to make yourself a set of flashcards. Flashcards are a good way to memorize medical terms. The more you learn, the more flashcards you can add, which ultimately increases your medical knowledge. Good luck, everyone.